I think it would be fair to say that no one ever believed the NHS would get £350 million a week. I know that's what people suggested, but, you know, that's never going to happen, is it? Well, one of the obvious issues that the NHS complain about is the increased difficulty in getting staff from overseas. Primarily, but not exclusively, nursing staff. I don't know what the figures are offhand. What I do know is that NHS trusts have difficulty recruiting sufficient nursing staff as it is. So discouraging people from elsewhere in Europe, even aside the rest of the world, to apply for jobs in the UK doesn't help. And there is certainly a large number of vacancies for nursing staff in the NHS. We don't train enough nurses fast enough at the moment. I think, to be fair, it's uncertain. Let's look forward rather than looking back, because of course we're not out of the EU yet. And so there are no financial implications one way or the other as things stand. So the main problem for the NHS, at the moment, would be the uncertainty as to what the law is going to be going forward. There are all sorts of EU rules and regulations which the NHS has to comply with. The procurement rules. So, you know, when the NHS buys equipment, it has to, comply with EU legislation, to be fair and open and transparent. With data protection, the EU General Data Protection Regulations come into effect next month. We assume that the same regulations will apply after we leave the EU, but there's a whiff of uncertainty about it, which isn't good for planning and for management of public services. As far as budget is concerned, I mean, nobody knows. I would seriously doubt that anybody in the NHS is expecting a substantial increase in its funding as a result of monies which may or may not be paid. One interesting side little fact, if you like, that people just, why would you know, is the European Medicines Agency is an EU institution which used to have its headquarters in London, and that's now moving to the Netherlands. Well, it doesn't matter where the headquarters is, but the fact of the matter is, as you are part of the Medicines Agency, then the use of particular drugs and medical instruments is approved and available on a European basis. So it's much easier to get your new drugs approved and available quickly. If we are outside the European Medicines Agency, it is likely, again, we're not sure, who knows, it is likely that approval and authority for use of drugs in the UK will be slower than it is now, because the drug companies will apply to the European Medicines Agency for approval for the use of drugs. Why would you bother? Or you would apply to any United Kingdom UK Medicines Agency, but that's another piece of admin, more money, and a smaller market than the European market as a whole. So there is an argument which says that leaving the EU will have a negative impact on the availability of new drug treatments to the UK. But nobody tells you about that, do they? I mean, it's not like it'd be big, and we don't know. If we get out of the European Medicines Agency, where does that leave us? I'm sure they're thinking about it, and I'm sure they will do something about it.
Hmm.
There's every risk, for example, well, not a risk, there's every chance, I suspect, that the government will simply go, oh my God, and pay to be part of the European Medicines Agency and Euratom in any event. Otherwise, you've got to set up your own agency. Who can say? It's a mess, really, isn't it? But I couldn't possibly say that. Well, it should have been discussed. But, of course, you know, the campaign to leave the EU simply concentrated on money, immigration, and sovereignty. Well, what's sovereignty if you can't run, you know, your drugs properly? But nobody thought about that. The NHS is going to fall apart, and, you know, drugs will not be available. It just means that new drugs will take a little longer to get into use into the UK than would have happened previously. We don't know. Is that a week or is it a year? I don't know. There'll always be a winter crisis, whether we're in or out of the EU. I don't think leaving the EU will make the winter crisis any worse. It'll make it any better, but it won't make it any worse. It'll just be there, and the government will put money in, irrespective of where it gets it from. And of course, what is happening is that the government and the Minister Jeremy Hunt are talking about putting money into the EU, putting money into the NHS, and suggesting that it's because we're not in the EU. Well, you know, they're putting the money in anyway because they've got no choice. I think they do think it affects the NHS, but they're not sure how. So, you know, they think that it may be that, you know, more money will be made available. You know, people will argue that we leave the NHS, we leave the EU, so people so they can have more money. Other people will argue that if we leave the EU, you know, we'll all be poorer and there'll be less money. Who knows? I mean, both arguments are, you know, are just based on very little information. There's more money being paid to the NHS than ever before. It is critically short of money because it's more expensive to deliver healthcare than ever before. And we expect better healthcare, and that comes as a price. So it's already in, you know, financial pressures, irrespective of whether we're in the EU or outside the EU. It hasn't had actual cutbacks in the last 8 years, but its funding has not kept pace with healthcare inflation. Healthcare inflation is larger than normal inflation. The price of delivering healthcare and the use of drugs and equipment, and specialist equipment and machinery, increases faster than the rate of normal inflation. Technology develops and gets better. We can do more things. You've got to pay for that. I expect the government will put more money into the NHS, and I expect them to say that's because we're not in the EU. Should we leave the EU? We're not out yet. You know, that's what I expect them to do. I expect that the NHS will always ask for more money, and I expect it will never be given what it's asking. But I expect that the government will give it substantially more money in the near term because of the politics of it. And I expect that they will say that that's a dividend from leaving the EU. Whether that's true or not, I don't know.